Welcome to the Daily Dispatch. First, we're giving you news of the U.S. Central Command's report on its operations against ISIS in 2022, taking out 700 militants. For our next headline, we'll spotlight developments in the Pacific Ocean, where China and the Philippines announced the setting up of South China Sea Hotline. And to round out the dispatch, we will be providing you news on violent clashes in South Sudan, a close encounter between a Chinese and U.S. aircraft, and Belarus intercepting a Ukrainian missile. We're here to give you news and to help you infer the world around you. I'm Usama Nizamani, and here's your Daily Dispatch. Starting off, we're covering news of the U.S. Central Command reporting that it's killed 700 suspected members of the globally designated terror outfit ISIS in 2022. The details of the operations highlight an aggressive counterterrorism campaign that continues to this day. 5 years after the US-led coalition eradicated the militant groups controlled over Iraq and Syria. As per the official statement, 466 Islamic State operatives were killed in Syria and another 220 in Iraq. A total of 374 militants were captured. CENTCOM also reported that no US forces were injured or killed in these operations. It's important to note the US CENTCOM relies heavily on the support of Iraqi and Syrian partners to conduct these operations in a bid to maintain steady pressure on the ISIS network. During this period, key leaders of the ISIS network have also been killed. Last February, ISIS leader Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi, the successor to al-Baghdadi, was killed in a 2019 raid, was killed in Syria after he detonated a bomb in his apartment as US forces closed in, eliminating what President Joe Biden called a major terrorist threat. And this July, the US military reported it had killed a top Islamic State leader and seriously wounded another in a drone strike in Syria. In Thursday's statement, the top US commander in the Middle East, General Michael Kurilla, listed that American military is employing a three-pronged approach to the campaign, pursuing the group's leaders through partnered operations with local forces, continuing to sustain Islamic State members in the region, and attempting to prevent children from being radicalized. These operations continue despite President Biden's statement at the UN last year after a chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, suggesting the US will no longer fight the wars of the past. And while such aggressive measures in the region are vital for ensuring the terrorist outfit is unable to rebuild its capabilities in Iraq and Syria, a wider strategy will be needed to counter affiliated groups in other parts of the Middle East, North and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as East and South Asia, a threat to both domestic security for many countries, but also to Western countries where ISIS has conducted terror attacks in the past. Similarly, while the United States has provided stabilization and assistance in areas of Syria and Iraq liberated from the Islamic State in an effort to prevent the group's re-emergence, including more than $1.3 billion in stabilization assistance for Syria since 2011, gaps in adequate rehabilitation for countries like Afghanistan, ravaged by terrorism in recent years, increase the risk of ISIS splinter groups finding ground to rebuild and escalate their operations. On to our next headline. The Philippines and China have agreed to open a new line of communication to reduce maritime tensions and to avoid miscommunications and miscalculations in the South China Sea. The hotline is expected to enable direct communications at all levels of their foreign ministries. The South China Sea in the Pacific Ocean contains some of the most important shipping lanes in the world and is abundant in maritime resources. Besides, it has also emerged as a home of international territorial disputes, especially over the oil-rich Spratly Islands, which Beijing calls Nansha Islands, among many states, including China and the Philippines. Their competing claims over the South China Sea have been a source of tensions between Manila and Beijing. The former has accused China of harassing its ships around the Spratly Islands and encroaching upon tracts of the South China Sea, including a contested reef, by sending hundreds of ships, while Beijing justifies its claims by invoking the 9-dash line, which encompasses 90% of the 3 million square kilometers South China Sea. However, the establishment of a new line of communication signals a willingness on both sides to manage their disputes and reflects the foreign policy direction of the President Marcos vis-a-vis China, who has called Beijing the biggest strategic partner of the Philippines and has tried to attract more Chinese investments. This development is also being seen as an attempt by the Philippines to balance ties with its treaty ally, the United States, and its neighbor, and the second biggest economy in the world, China. The Philippines has a mutual defense agreement with the US signed in 1959, and both states reaffirmed their security cooperation in 2014 through the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. As the US pivots to Asia-Pacific and US-China global power competition increases, it will be a real test for the Philippines to maintain a balance in its relations with Washington and Beijing. For our next story, we're covering news of communal violence in South Sudan, where fighting among armed youth has resulted in 56 deaths. Cattle raids, child abduction, and blood feuds have been the main source of conflict between the ethnic groups in South Sudan for years. And in this instance, armed Nuer youth from the state of Jonglei began attacking the Murle community in Greater Pibor on December 24th. So far, 51 of those killed were Nuer attacks, with only 5 Murle defenders killed. The Greater Pibor administration is struggling to bring a stop to the fighting, despite soldiers being deployed, and officials from both states have urged the fighters to withdraw, appealing to the national government to intervene and bring an end to these intercommunal clashes. The territory of South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in 2011, but has been plagued by such violence and clashes for decades now. And this latest tragedy comes on the back of last week's warnings by the UN peacekeeping mission, flagging the mobilization of armed Nuer youth ahead of a potential raid against the Murle. Experts and global bodies have long spotlighted the need for strengthening the state of South Sudan and reconciling political actors to bring an end to this vicious cycle through development, accountability, devolution of power, and an inclusive approach to peace. But for now, South Sudan continues to struggle as a state. And this is a trend we see across the global south, with a lack of equitable economic and human development across countries, a precursor for both domestic conflicts as well as the emergence of terrorist threats that affect the globe as a whole. And lastly, a People's Liberation Army Navy fighter aircraft and a US Air Force aircraft over the South China Sea came within 10 feet of each other, with a US aircraft needing to take evasive maneuvers. A similar incident occurred in 2001, where a Chinese Navy fighter aircraft and a US Navy interceptor aircraft had a mid-air collision, forcing a landing on Hainan Island. China has overlapping claims with neighboring Southeast Asian states on the South China Sea and has expressed strong objections to such flights over the South China Sea. However, the US military, in a statement, stressed, "We expect all countries in the Indo-Pacific region to use international airspace." This is in tune with the statement by US Defense Secretary back in November, stating that the United States will continue to fly, to sail, and operate in areas where international law allows. He's also stressed to his Chinese counterpart to improve crisis communications and raised the issue of dangerous behavior by Chinese military planes. As we told you in our earlier dispatches, China has scaled up the number of aerial sorties around Taiwan this year, ever since US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. These aerial sorties have also picked up pace after the US committed to providing defense assistance to Taiwan. Experts have expressed apprehensions that a mid-air collision between aircraft over the South China Sea can result in a crisis or ratchet up tensions between the two sides. The presence of strong crisis communications remains essential to the prevention of such crises. An assessment by Belarus's Air Defense Battalion concluded that a Ukrainian S-300 air defense missile was intercepted by Belarus Air Defense near the village of Gorbaka. One consideration is the possibility of a stray missile, similar to the one that exploded along Ukraine-Poland border, while the Belarusian authorities stated that it could lead to catastrophic consequences. Ukraine's defense ministry has neither confirmed nor denied the Belarusian report, but did agree to hold an investigation. The Defense Ministry also suspected a provocation by Moscow, which laid out a route for its cruise missiles to provoke their interception in the airspace over the territory of Belarus. Since the onset of the war, Belarus has been providing its military bases to Russia, with many fearing a Russian attack on Ukraine from the northern border of Belarus. Russia and Belarus conducted live-fire exercises and anti-aircraft guided launch missiles in a recent military drill in October. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko stated that he is participating in the war to prevent the spread of the conflict to Belarus, to prevent an attack on Belarus by Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, and to buffer Russia. Despite many analysts believing that Belarus would not attack Ukraine, this missile incident and an earlier such incident on November 15th in Poland, where a stray missile led to 2 civilian deaths, there are fears that the war could spread to its neighbors. That's all, folks. We'd be happy to receive your feedback and suggestions. We'll be back tomorrow with more bite-sized news that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the country, the region, and the globe. I'm Usama Nizamani, and this was your Daily Dispatch.